All right, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Jim Wahl, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Today, we're diving into a part of clinical research that sponsors rely on but rarely see up close: the work patient advocacy groups are doing long before a trial launches, work that directly shapes patient recruitment, feasibility, and real-world participation. Organizations like the Alagille Syndrome Alliance, or ALGSA, aren't just supporting awareness or education. They're helping families navigate complex decisions, provide valuable protocol feedback, identifying recruitment barriers early, and leading research initiatives that fill critical scientific gaps. Much of this happens behind the scenes, yet it has meaningful implications for study success across all therapeutic areas. Before we introduce our panelists, a quick note. If you have questions or comments at any point, feel free to drop them directly into the chat. We'll keep an eye on those throughout the session and save time at the end to address as many as we can. With that, let's meet today's speakers. First, I'd like to introduce Roberta Smith. Roberta is the president of the Alagille Syndrome Alliance. She brings more than a decade of patient advocacy experience, a background in nuclear medicine, and over 20 years as a caregiver within the ALGS community. She leads ALGSA's strategic growth, partnerships, and community outreach, and centers her work on elevating patient needs, supporting families, and guiding ALGSA's expanding research and scientific initiatives. Welcome, Roberta. Cher Bork, Executive Director of ALGSA, combines nonprofit leadership with a personal connection to rare disease as a rare cancer survivor and working in the nonprofit sector for over 15 years. She leads ALGSA's community programs, partnerships, and strategic growth alongside Roberta, all grounded with a deep commitment to amplifying the patient voice. Thank you for joining us today, Cher.
Hi, thank you so much, Jim.
And our third panelist is Karsten Baumgaertel, who serves as Scientific Research Coordinator for ALGSA, where he spearheaded the development of the organization's scientific research network and manages the continued expansion and strategic growth of the organization's scientific initiatives. His work focuses on aligning clinicians, researchers, and families around under-researched aspects of Alagille syndrome and bringing critical scientific and feasibility insights to the forefront. Welcome, Karsten.
Glad to be here.
Thank you all for being here. We're really looking forward to the discussion. To start us off, we'd love to get a quick sense of how those of you in the audience currently work with advocacy groups. It will help frame up where today's conversation begins. So we'll launch our first poll now. So the question is, how does your organization most often engage with patient advocacy groups around clinical research? One-off awareness or campaign support, for example, social posts, disease awareness days or events. 2, study-specific recruitment or enrollment support. 3, input into protocol design, feasibility, or patient burden review. 4, ongoing partnership across multiple programs or indications. Or 5, we rarely or never work directly with advocacy groups. Please make your selection, and then we'll review the results. All right, now let's take a look at those results. So the majority of the participants selected study-specific recruitment or enrollment support, followed closely with one-off awareness or campaign support. There was also some votes for ongoing partnership across multiple programs or indications. And then a couple of participants said we rarely or never work with advocacy groups. It's interesting to me that no one selected input into protocol design, feasibility, or patient burden review. So Roberta, maybe I'd like to start with you to say, what is your impression of these results? Do they align with your experience?
Very much so. Through my experience as a patient advocacy leader, I also paralleled as a caregiver with a child in a clinical trial for 11 years. And through that experience, I was able to identify gaps in clinical trial experiences that many of the caregivers and patients were experiencing through that time frame, and things that could have easily been resolved if patient advocacy, if our organization, for example, might have been on the ground level with protocol design or patient burden, understanding the true patient burden. And simple things like, having reimbursements that take over 12 weeks when you're expecting a family, for example, who is already dealing with a heavy burden of disease to pay for something, and then you reimburse, and that takes 8 to 12 weeks. You're literally taking groceries off their table sometimes, and that can keep them from continuing in the trial, or they may drop out or not even get started. So those are areas where we can really bring that patient voice and our experience and what we know within the community to the table. So that's just one of the examples where, with the protocol design, how critical it is to have patient advocacy there. I would also say, when it comes to patient recruitment, we truly are unpaid patient recruitment arm. And I say this because even at our organization, I might spend an hour to 10 hours with a patient on the side who might be scared to enter the clinical trial. And they will have all sorts of questions that they will not call the company up and say, what about XYZ? They want to hear from someone they know, from someone they trust, that they've been dealing with for a long time, who understands their family in a way that they may not trust a company or a company's representatives to share information with. So we really become counselors, if you will, on patient recruitment. And we even counsel patients to stay in a clinical trial sometimes and make sure that they understand, here's the pathway. Please call this nurse navigator. Please call this clinical researcher. Don't be scared to be honest about what's going on. And I think there's a lot of legwork in the background that advocacy does like this that really isn't recognized. And it's not to say that anybody's doing anything wrong, but I think just an awareness that goes on, and the burden that an organization like ours or any other nonprofit would carry to keep that recruitment strong. It truly is there. I would also say that families do share fears, burdens, doubts with our organization, just like others as well. I always like to say that organizations are like the Aaron Brockovich of the community. We know the patients, where they live, all their family members, each family member struggles. We know who they're related to. We know if they have a history of disease involvement with other family members. If they don't, if it's genetic, if it's not. We understand what if they've lost their job, if they're financially hurting. We have a glimpse into that in a way that a company does not. So when a family has a fear and they come to us, we come with an understanding of, we know that you're struggling with job loss, with financial burden, with this, with that. It will be okay. Let's have this conversation with the clinical site so they understand it. So we do a lot of different advocacy pieces in the background, and really truly recruit in a way that the company just simply cannot.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that, going to conferences over the years, whether they're industry conferences focused broadly or even going to rare disease specific conferences, listening to pharmaceutical companies, listening to patient advocacy groups, I feel like everybody agrees that there needs to be that engagement with the patients in the pharma companies, that when you're designing your protocol, designing your clinical trial, and even thinking about things after the clinical trial, the impact that these trials have on the patients themselves and the community and the family. I wonder if there's something more, Cher, I'm going to turn it to you, is, what more specifically should sponsors be aware of when engaging patients in advocacy groups and, thinking through how does their trial impact the patients?
Yeah, so we develop a deep understanding of the community needs for a patient advocacy group, we can do that through moderating our social media channels. We have private support groups on there where families and patients are, they're willing to discuss things with one another. They're willing to ask questions. And we keep that, excuse me, we keep that moderated so that we can learn from them, we can intervene, we can help, wherever the need is. A patient advocacy group can also do surveys and polls of their community that maybe other stakeholder groups are not able to do. And for us, we use the surveys, the results of that to kind of help build our programs. It builds the content for our symposium, our scientific meeting, our research roundtable meeting. And that's really important for us. Like you mentioned, Jim, the connections. That's really important to us, not just to learn what is needed from our families, but to make those connections and be that gateway. Once we get survey results, we like to come together at our symposium or our summit and have all the stakeholders sit across the table from one another. We've got pharmaceutical representatives, we've got clinicians, we've got scientists, and we've got patients and families. And we have this open dialogue, and that's just not something that we really see a lot. And so it's great for us to be able to communicate what we've learned to help better, those protocols, those clinical trials, those care initiatives, all of those things that the patients need that maybe one single patient or family can't communicate that. But when we all come together and learn from the community, then we can make an impact.
Yeah, it sounds like most things in life, things travel by word of mouth. Patients speak to each other, families speak to each other. Word gets out on, oh, this is a good clinical trial, or this is a challenging clinical trial for these reasons. So I'm curious, Karstens, from your perspective, with everything Cher just mentioned about how, people are talking, what have you seen about, patients communicating through, kind of an unbiased channel like this? What have they shared from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's inherently different relationships at play here. As patient advocacy group, we often are patients ourselves or have family members who are patients, and we firsthand understand the experience, as Roberta already mentioned. And I think that trust relationship is the foundation for the information that's being exchanged and the communication that happens between a patient advocacy group and patient community. I think pharma or biotech often is not fully understood by patients, and the mission that they have is not fully understood. So there's sort of a different type of dynamic at play, I think, and that's really important to sort of say up front. But truly what it comes down to is if we have patients that are in a trial, as part of a trial, they're worried, they've done a lot of diligence to get into this trial, right? They've spoken to Roberta, for example, they've spoken to other parents, they've informed themselves about the drug and about what it entails to be part of a trial. They understand how many visits they have to do, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now they're worried about being kicked out of the trial, right? They're worried about, hey, if I raise a red flag in the company's eyes, will they disqualify me to some extent? And so they come to us first with their concerns, and they come to us first with any if it's non-compliance, if it's anything that's going on, maybe even side effects, right? They're going to mention them to us because they don't want their child or if you're the patient yourself, you don't want to be disqualified from the trial and taken off the drug. And of course, that is particularly true if you are in a disease state where there's not many treatment options. And there are a lot of rare diseases are in that position. So I feel like that applies to many, many different disease states.
Yeah, I think I agree on so many of your points there. I think it's when patients, fear, enrolling in a clinical trial and what happens if they fear that they're going to come off the trial or they need to, remove themselves from the trial. A lot of that has to do with how the trial is set up. Is it set up for success? And I think that's really where we want to take, the topic here with our next poll question is looking at the feasibility of setting up a clinical trial. So here in our next poll question, when feasibility assessments fall short, what do you feel is most often missing before a trial starts? Your options are number one, a clear understanding of what study participation will require from the patients and families. Two, insight into under-researched aspects of the disease that shape patient needs and protocol design. Three, anticipation of where sites are likely to struggle operationally once enrollment begins. Or four is other, and please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. We'll give that another moment here for the audience to make their selections. All right, looking at the results, looks like the majority of the participants selected anticipation of where sites are likely to struggle operationally once enrollment begins. And then there were also second most popular choice was a clear understanding of what study participation will require from patients and families. And least of all, insight into under-researched aspects of the disease that shape patient needs and protocol design. So I think let's focus on that, on the one that got the most results, 57%, anticipation of where sites are going to struggle operationally. Roberta, again, in your experience, as you're looking at clinical trials and having, a child that was in a clinical trial, reflecting on that response, what does that mean to you?
Things that mattered to me were how far is the site? Does that site understand our disease state? Do they already have a patient base there that is strong? And do those patients on the backside of our organization, in our private support setting, do they feel supported there? And if they're supported there, what does that mean to them? And does the company understand what that means to patients? I think there are a lot of aspects that companies could really learn from the patients in a private setting. If we were to take, an industry leader, CEO, and put them in a room of patients and just say, ask them any questions that you want, and make a more personal setting, I think we would find things that companies think matter to patients are completely different than what really matters to patients. For example, for me, I was a single parent and I worked a full-time job, sometimes overtime. I worked many hours, and then the closest clinical site was over 7 hours. So I would work an 8-hour day, drive 7 hours, get there at 1 o'clock in the morning, have to be to the appointment by 8 o'clock, have sometimes only a 15-minute appointment, and drive 7 hours home. I'd miss that day of work. And especially when you start out in a clinical trial, if you have more clinical visits in the beginning of the trial, then I'm missing paycheck, funding. I'm missing the opportunity to potentially keep my job, or I put it at risk. And I think now companies are really starting to understand that, but we're not there yet. So for us, those key areas are things that we can bring to the forefront immediately. But I think where the gap is that companies wait until the protocols are already done, and then they come possibly see an organization. By then, they can't change their protocols. And that can be detrimental to the success of the trial. A couple other things, let me just give it as an example. I think some companies will struggle to get sites, or maybe they don't know all the sites. And I can share recently on a research study that we're doing, I single-handedly brought in a potential of 55 sites by connecting with physicians, because I have a relationship with them that I've built over many, many years. And I did this in 2 to 3 waves of simple emails and brought these physicians to the table. I think we had maybe 45 plus calls. They answered my emails, sometimes within 24 hours, sometimes at 10 o'clock at night. So we have the ability to increase sites and open the door especially if there's a concern with a physician who might think this drug's going to cost too much and they are unwilling to participate in something that might cost money, too much money, or if they just don't trust the drug yet, or if they have a pathway already built before they would use that drug with other medications. Sometimes they need a nudge, and having that relationship with the patient organization can quickly turn around whether they will participate as a site.
Yeah. Roberta, you mentioned a couple things there that your organization is doing about, recruiting sites for clinical trials, even doing some studies yourself. I think that's an area that, the industry is starting to become aware of now is that patient advocacy groups, first they got organized, then they got informed, and now they're taking action. So I'm wondering, Karsten, from your perspective, is what are some of the ways that patient advocacy groups like ALGSA have taken action, things you've done to kind of close some of those under-researched scientific gaps when it comes to rare disease?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think Alagille syndrome is part of a group of diseases that doesn't just affect one organ system, and there are many out there, obviously, particularly genetic diseases. But that means that there's always a focus on one prominent feature of the disease, and then the other ones are largely neglected, like you said. And maybe there's some academics looking in them, and that's really interesting. But really, nobody has a path to develop a treatment. And so I think we have found that we need to understand Alagille syndrome and organ systems that people aren't as interested in. And one interesting example here from about a year and a half ago, so when we kicked off our scientific research network, we started an eye focus group. And the eye is affected in Alagille syndrome. There's a couple of case reports in the literature, and that's all we had to go by. And so we recruited about 10 different stakeholders, including patients and caregivers, but also physicians and researchers, to come together and talk about and discuss and outline really a path forward to advance research on the eye. And I think what we are planning to do now is an observational study to really have a cross-section of what Alagille patients are suffering with in the eye. And I think there's an important aspect here that I want to emphasize and relates to what Roberta said earlier. We do have a few patients that are legally blind. Now, how are they going to drive to a study site 7 hours away in order to participate in a study if they're adult patients? So there's practicalities associated with that, but also, of course, we are interested in ultimately developing a path to develop treatments for all of these features of the disease. So we feel like we're uniquely positioned to be able to do that because we can quickly recruit patients. We can quickly put out, through all our channels, we can put out surveys. So we put out a visual function survey, for example, earlier this year, and we received, I think, 360 responses within a couple of months. So that was really fruitful. I think, we leverage our platform and our communication platforms very efficiently. But ultimately, it's always to gather more data and let that data direct us as far as research goes, and then hopefully bring that data to drug discoverers and other people that do therapeutic options and help them, inform them, I guess, ultimately.
Yeah, Karsten, you made me think of a question just here on the fly, and it's around receptivity to organizations like yourself. So I'm curious about when you're talking to investigators and key opinion leaders, do you notice a difference in how receptive they are to your organization versus, say, the pharmaceutical company when it comes to doing research?
Absolutely. I mean, so my background is in biotech. I worked in biotech for over a decade before I joined the Alagille Syndrome Alliance. And it's sometimes very difficult to actually get a foot in the door with KOLs. As pharma or biotech, they're viewed as money-making machines, right? And often, particularly in the rare disease space, drugs are very expensive because of the cost that it takes to, or the cost involved in developing that therapeutic. But we've had multiple examples where we've reached out to individuals that we don't know, that are not part of our network, and the 55 clinical sites that Roberta mentioned earlier is one of those examples, but we've done this over and over again, where the responses come in an hour or two after we've sent out an email, and it could be 10 o'clock at night local time for them. I've never experienced anything like this before. Like usually, as you know, in my days in biotech, I had to write 2 reminders and basically say, "Oh yeah, remember I sent you an email back here," and just following up on my email from then. And so it's a completely different ball game here, honestly. And I think it's important that again, there's a relationship with those KOLs, but in some cases we haven't had that pre-existing relationship, and we've still been able to get traction. And I think that that has really been, you know, for somebody who has that background in biotech, that has been really a game changer.
That's very interesting. Have you noticed any receptivity from the pharma companies themselves? You're generating all these data and insights, you know, when it comes to informing clinical development and protocols. Is how receptive has pharma and biotech been to the information that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is it depends. I know that's very charismatic, but it depends on the company. But I think ultimately it's also the onus is on us to educate pharma what we can do, right? And I think that's what that's what we've been trying to prioritize over the last year and a half. Come to them and basically discuss and lay out what we can achieve and what we've achieved in the past, right? And you can see sort of the coin drop as we're talking, you know, okay, hang on, these guys, it takes us a year to do this, and these guys have done it in 2 months or 3 months, right? So I think it's about creating and pointing out win-win situations, and there's so many win-win situations out there. It's a win-win-win because ultimately the patients also benefit from those relationships. So I think yeah, it really comes down to that.
Yeah. And it also sounds like you're directing pharma as to drive their attention to what priorities should they be paying attention to, what aspects of the disease require scientific attention. So I was wondering, you know, can you share us a little bit more about what are these family-driven research priorities? How does ALGSA, you know, discover these things and share these insights back with the pharma companies?
Sure. So I think everyone understands how important patient voice is in everything that we do. But to be able to have, like you said, the family-driven research, the patient-driven research is pretty phenomenal. And going back to, you know, the polls and the surveys that we do and the one-on-one conversations, you know, Roberta and I are always on with families and learning, you know, what's important to them. And it's not that clinicians don't know, it's that when you are in an appointment like that, there are some things, especially quality of life things, that might get pushed back and not discussed because there are more prevalent symptoms going on or, you know, things like that. But then through our discussions, you know, we learn about these things that are really impacting day-to-day life. Karsten mentioned the eyes. We also have a focus group on bone pain. We expanded that to be bone, muscle, and teeth. We knew, even Roberta's own daughter, we knew that there was deep bone pain not associated with breaks, for instance, but no one's really looking at that. We're not trying to step on what other research that's going on. We're just trying to identify ways that we can impact, you know, quality of life and research needs that aren't being met. So that's one of them. And through that, you know, something that a patient advocacy group is able to do when we expanded that to muscle and teeth, so it's bone, muscle, and teeth. One of the folks on that focus group who studies teeth, he had kind of some thoughts on, gosh, where he thought things were going wrong there. And he said, God, it really would be great if I had some teeth. And so we were able to provide him with that. We were able to send him not just patient teeth, but sibling teeth. And so it's just amazing when a company will allow us to be involved, some of the doors that we can open up for them. We also another challenge that we heard about that we knew, but it's not openly discussed, is child abuse accusations within our community. There are a lot of bone breaks with our patients, and they're unexplained some of the time, even in infants. And so we were having a lot of child abuse accusations, cases opened up, children being taken from their families. And so we're able to, put some literature out so that if something happens in the emergency room, maybe an ER tech will go and look at literature and say, oh, maybe this is connected to Alagille syndrome instead of just assuming it's child abuse. So there are so many aspects that we see that maybe clinicians, pharma, or even scientists and researchers don't see. And it just goes back to the patient voice. And like you said, that, the family-driven research is so important to us.
And Jim, for context, let me just say for the viewers, Alagille syndrome is a rare pediatric cholestatic liver disease, but it's a syndrome that affects some to all organs and systems. So what we're dealing with here is a focus on science and research on liver. But what's happening at home is, like Cher said, bone issues. Like Karsten said, eye issues. We have families with kidney. We have families with short stature, nutrition issues, growth issues. It goes on and on and on. So to kind of pull this together, even though liver is the main focus of research, what can we do as an organization to make these things that are happening at home, causing day-to-day struggle, causing pain, causing challenges, causing a lack of the ability for a child to go to school? What can we do to improve day-to-day outside of the liver? And as Cher said, and I'll kind of reiterate, we don't want to be the focus of all the science and research that's going on. That's just not reasonable. But what we can do is take all those polls, all the surveys, all the conversations, all the private support pages, and we can say, hey, clinician, did you know that this is happening? No, we had no idea. And we've seen it time and time again in our community. And now we see movement in areas of research because we have brought these concerns to the table, which is extraordinary. We want to support what's already going on, and we want to keep a limelight on those things that we have to be considering. So I think, and like Karsten said, it's a win-win-win.
Yeah. Roberta, you mentioned that Alagille is a multi-organ syndrome. So I was wondering, what unique challenges have you faced since it's so diverse and so broad and affects so many different systems when you're trying to go out there and do research and talk to investigators and, find, therapeutic options for patients with Alagille syndrome? What unique challenges have you faced? Because it is so diverse and there's so many different things
Yeah.
you could be looking at.
It's unbelievable, Jim, really. And it has really opened my eyes as, first of all, I started as a parent before I was an advocate. And the challenges that I ran into, of course, with rare disease is that no one I knew the disease. So that isolated me with my family and friends and community. Then trying to find a physician that understands the disease. For me, I was very lucky. I lived near a large institution. So we had a physician immediately, but that is not the case in the majority of rare disease or even Alagille patients. We have diagnostic odysseys that are just unbelievable. And because Alagille syndrome is really multi-organ, multi-system, we have individuals who are misdiagnosed with one issue and the dots are never connected as part of a syndrome. We have challenges for people who live more rurally, that if they're just seeing a physician, like a family physician, things might get overlooked and their diagnosis could take much, much longer. I think we see other challenges as well, even in my own family, where because liver is the focus and was the focus of my daughter's syndrome, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at the kidneys or the thyroid or the malnutrition issues and continue to look at them consistently. Now with Alagille syndrome, and this can be very challenging, is that some with Alagille syndrome, even though it's classified as a pediatric cholestatic liver disease, they don't have liver involvement. They might have severe cardiac involvement. And so their cardiologist may never link it back to this syndrome. They may link it to just this cardiology issue, and then eyes, audiology, kidney, those may all be overlooked if they're mild and not severe and in someone's face. And these are some of the huge challenges we see within our community. And then one last thing with pediatric cholestatic liver disease, what we personally experience, my daughter had liver disease many, many years. I have twin daughters, they're 22 years old, one with Alagille, one without. She had a liver transplant. It's just been over a year now, but she had mild liver disease. I think there's a misconception, at least in Alagille, that, once they have a liver transplant, Alagille's, you're good. And that is not true. Liver transplant is a whole new diagnosis. It's a whole new set of challenges, brings on a whole new set of worries. But on top of that, we still have to deal with kidney, still got to deal with heart, still have to deal with eyes, still have to deal with thyroid. So we can't keep a tunnel vision on rare disease. We have to always be thinking about the periphery of that disease and what that means for patients at home. It's critical to not stay focused on one area.
Yeah, indeed. Roberta, you've called out a lot of different things here that, your organization's doing. It's clear that patient advocacy groups are motivated, informed, they're active in clinical research. So as we transition to the last topic here, we'd like to launch another poll, for our audience members in the industry, is where do you see the biggest challenges today in collaborating with advocacy groups? Is it one, engaging advocacy groups early enough in study planning? Two, compliance or legal constraints around partnership and public acknowledgement? Three, ensuring advocacy contributions are incorporated meaningfully. Four, maintaining clear, consistent communication before and during studies. Or five, other, and please feel free to put your submission in the chat. So we'll give that in a moment or two for our audience to reply. All right, and looking at the results here, they're pretty well balanced between, I think the one that had the most responses was engaging advocacy groups early enough in study planning being the biggest challenge in collaborating with advocacy groups today, followed equally by ensuring advocacy contributions are incorporated meaningfully, maintaining clear, consistent communication before and after studies, and then the minority of the results were in compliance or legal constraints. So I guess, Roberta, what would be your advice to our industry partners in the audience today about engaging advocacy groups? What are some of the barriers and how can they overcome those barriers?
Absolutely. I do think there is a general misconception about working with advocacy groups that all we want is money. And I need to say that simply is not the truth. But there has to be an understanding. So if we are helping recruit patients and a company is not allowed to publicly say that we help them recruit patients, then we are taking away the exposure to our community that we have done a heavy lift here. And the attention then goes on the company and all the hard work they did to recruit the patients, which we never want to take away. But the fact of the matter is, as we stated earlier, there's an entire recruitment arm going on in the back end that is not acknowledged. That red tape has to be taken away and given to, the participation that we have early on when a company is starting a trial, because we're depending on our community to understand that we are here for them, working for them. And I think, the name of this webinar is very true to the experience that we work in the shadows, to the point where, it does feel like we're kind of put on the back burner as like a part of the team, a recognition point. And we don't want that for us. I don't want my name up there, Cher's name, Karsten's name. But as an organization, we need the organization to be recognized on what we were able to do to help get the patients in. As well, if a company starts a trial, they may not know any of the patients, any of the physicians. So that heavy lift, oftentimes those introductions, they come from us. At some point, the company surpasses how many patients that we know and how many physicians we know. It becomes a big disservice if we can dump our contacts onto a company and help them build out that program, and they can't do that for us. It's difficult because our whole goal is to continue to help patients and connect them with physicians and help get physicians educated in areas like we talked about earlier, unmet needs that they may not know about outside of a clinical trial. So I think there are a lot of red tape issues, a lot of bureaucratic issues that keep organizations like ours stifled and exposed and recognized for the hard work that we're doing. And it's a sad state of affairs when that happens because, and the funding comes, I would say, with that, you know, as a company builds up and their program builds up, I think that organizations like ours should be included in the fruits of that. If we've been able to bring tons of patients to the table, then we should be recognized for that and our organization financially compensated. And that doesn't always happen. And, it's tough. It's tough.
It sounds like the status quo in the industry is not doing your organizations, any good. So I'm wondering, Karsten, as the director of scientific research, how is ALGSA and other organizations, other patient advocacy groups, how are you kind of rewriting the playbook about how to engage organizations, how to conduct clinical research?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question, Jim. I mean, I think there are disease spaces where patient advocacy groups have led the way. Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is a great example. They worked with Vertex to, basically develop the treatments, and there was a win-win situation there. And so we're not necessarily writing a brand new playbook, but we're trying to take lessons from other organizations that have walked before us, right? Walked that path before us, and we're trying to apply them to our organization. Each organization is different, because also each disease is different, and the landscape as far as pharma is concerned is different, and research is concerned is different. So we actually took a long, hard look at what it is that we're good at, right? What is it that we do really well? And then we basically, and it was literally just a list. We came up with a list of, we can help with patient recruitment, we can help with introductions to KOLs and to physicians and clinical sites, et cetera, et cetera. And then we, I sort of took the background that I had in pharma and thought about what would it cost the organization to do this internally. And again, it's important that they're not reinventing the wheel. We are here to work with them. And I think we can do better than what they are trying to do if they internalize it. And so I think it's really important that there's an aspect of complementarity versus a competition. We're not trying to compete with anybody. We're not trying to dominate any particular space. But I do think that we do some things really, really well. And so once we had sort of that outlines, and we ended up basically thinking about how to talk and how to engage pharma partners as far as utilizing our strength is concerned, right? And so now when we have conversations with pharma, we have those proactively. We go out to any company that has any interest in cholestatic disorders, particularly in pediatric cholestatic disorders. But I've even reached out to companies that are working on the eye, for example. We talked about the eye focus group, and companies that have genetic panels for the eye. So we go out and we basically tell the story according to what we can do and what we do best. And then we have, I think importantly, we kind of have a goal in mind, right? Which is really truly just collaboration. Let's work together to solve this thing. And I think when that comes through and shines through, I think it changes the tone of the conversation.
We have a question in the chat, and this actually, I think, goes nicely to kind of bring our conversation full circle, because earlier when we did a poll question, one of the responses was that, there seems to be a lot of one-off engagements with patient advocacy groups. So the question in the chat is, could you give an example of a positive relationship with a sponsor, maybe something you've seen them do well? Cher, I was wondering if you could maybe take this question and even reflect on like what does a good partnership look like with a
Sure.
sponsor?
Sure, absolutely. Karsten just mentioned collaboration, and that truly is the only way to make this work. So we are fortunate that we have a couple of partners that we've been working with for years, and so when you start with a patient advocacy group early on, and we can help with the protocol, the trial design, all the way through to what we were just talking about is those understudied areas. And in the middle there, you've got the companies that start to really get to know the communities and really care deeply about more than just the one aspect that they might be studying. And so Roberta mentioned the funding. It's super important for organizations like ours because when a company starts to care about the community that they are serving, but they're not able to maybe put programs in place like we are, that funding can help that. For our organization, we have a financial assistance program. We provide holiday gifts. There's all of these impactful, meaningful programs that we develop that wouldn't be possible without our partnerships. And so, if a partner can understand from day one how we can really collaborate on multiple things over the years, we do develop a trust between us, bringing together not just the patient advocacy group and pharma, but also, or biotech, but also bringing in patients, also bringing in scientists. Those are some really meaningful things that we are able to accomplish that maybe get overlooked or, just aren't able to happen without the patient advocacy group. So we do have some great partners that have done all of these things and even more, helping bring us in. If a company needs to do some educational materials, who better to help them with that than the folks like us who are living it every single day? And so some of our partners have been able to bring us in on developing those educational materials and really listening to what we have to say, to make those better for the community, the greater community. So, just again, like Karsten said, the collaboration, the trust, that's what's really important in growing with, you know, a company that may start with maybe one aspect of a disease like Alagille syndrome. Working with us, they might get really excited about other aspects or learn something new, and their company will grow too. So again, it's just a trust, a partnership, a sustained partnership for long term is really important.
I'd like to add one thing to that also. Uh, for that question, some really amazing things that some of the companies do that kind of elevate that partnership is that they include us in advisory meetings, advisory panels. They help us with, include us in some of the initiatives that they're doing. They allow us to speak at their companies so that everyone at the company knows where our focus and where our pulse is as well. And then they also allow us to help them with connecting them with individuals who have very compelling stories. I think every disease state, has maybe families or individuals that speak really well and eloquently about their story. And so we can help them and connect them to individuals that maybe are prepped on telling a story or that can really describe the impact that they're dealing with at home, or how maybe we see testimonies within the community and the company is interested and leans on us to help them find just great testimonies that talk about the impact of their drugs, including us in all of these things. That makes a great relationship, a positive one.
On that same note about collaboration and also going back to what we were talking about, Roberta, you had mentioned about patient burden, site burden. There's another question in the chat. The question is, from your collective points of view, How can pharma sponsors leverage your capabilities to get sites on board for progressive change, as in using new tools, technology, processes to make trials go more smoothly, quickly, and efficiently?
I think Karsten really, kind of stated it well when he was talking about how we have to internally look at what are our strengths and list them out. And I think a company could easily come to us and say, where do you think you could help us? Because sometimes they don't know what they don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. And so if we just open up that dialogue, and the company might share, here's what our plans are for this next year. Where do you think you could contribute on XYZ? I think that opens up an open door dialogue about how our strengths could help improve their initiatives, their strengths could help improve ours. Even some of the challenges, I could say, in one of the companies that we worked with, there was difficulty in measuring a symptom and the effectiveness of the drug and how to measure the severity of the symptom. And we were critical in helping develop a novel tool that helped better, more clearly measure this symptom. I think these are areas that could, vastly advance and even seal the deal on whether we meet the endpoints in clinical trials.
Can I add something? Do we still have time?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. So I think the strongest relationships are often with the hubs, with the primary centers of excellence that treat that disease. And I think those ones tend to be at the forefront of innovation, even in clinical trial design. And we talked about different approaches to clinical trials. So what we've seen is that by working through those sites, we manage to also often bring in other sites into the conversations that may not be initially as interested in having that conversation about how to run the clinical trial, what tools to use, and it's really revolutionizing some of the approaches there. So I think it involves us, but it also involves some of these primary centers, these centers of excellence. And I think that's how we've in the past had success in trying to change how those trials are run, or what tools are being used to run the trials. I hope that answers your question, or the question that came in.
Yeah, absolutely. We're coming up on time now. So just to conclude our discussion here today, I think there's one thing that really came through. It's that advocacy groups aren't operating on the periphery of clinical research. They're doing critical work long before a study even enrolls. They're active during the study itself, advising pharma companies. And when sponsors engage with these advocacy groups and they engage with them early, openly, and consistently, studies become more feasible, more patient-centered, and ultimately more successful. So I'd like to thank our panelists today, Roberta, Cher, Karsten, for sharing your insights, and thanks to all of you for joining us. A recording will be sent out shortly. We appreciate your time today and hope to see you again on a future session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Having us.
Bye-bye.